We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Beis in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 68b. This daf is sponsored by Sean Kashani. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amud or Daf, please see the description box below and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the fact that by a Shifcha Kananis there's no Kiddushin and the child follows her, meaning the child is also an Eved. And the Gemara said, what's the source that there's no Kiddushin? The source is the pasuk that says Shvu lachem po im hachamor. We understand the pasuk to mean Am hadome lechamor, that the nation of slaves is similar to a donkey, just like there's no Kiddushin by a donkey. So too there's no Kiddushin by a slave, by a Shifcha Kananis. And the Gemara continues, Valda kemosim and from where do we know that her child is like her? And the Gemara says to that, because the pasuk says, Ho'isha vilodeha tia ladonea, it says the woman and her children will be to the master, meaning the children will all follow the mother. Rashi explains, Ho'isha vilodeha b'shivcha kananis sheyichado le'eved ivri. The pasuk over here is talking about a shivcha kananis, that she is together with an eved ivri. Eved ivri, of course, is a full Jew. V'yamar kra, and the pasuk says, Delo yetze haben chavshi imaviv. It says the child doesn't go free with the father, rather stays with the mother. That's how we see that the child gets the status of the mother. And the Gemara continues, Nachros Menala, and the other case in the Mishnah was a non-Jewish woman. How do we know that there's no Kiddushin by a non-Jewish woman? Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, Lo tischat in bam, you can't have chasnos with them. And so therefore you see from the pasuk that there is no marriage over there, there's no Kiddushin. Ashkachna de lo tafsi ba Kiddushe, so fine, we find in the pasuk that there's no Kiddushin. Valda kemosa Menala, and from where do we know that the child is like her, that the child follows the mother, meaning to say if the mother is not Jewish, so the child is not Jewish. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, the Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, Ki Yoser es bincha me'acharai. It says he's going to remove your son from me. And the Gemara explains, what is the pasuk talking about? Bincha haba mi Yisraelis korei bincha. Means to say as follows, your son that comes from a Jewish mother, that's called your son. V'ein bincha haba min ha'ovedes kochavim, but your son that comes from an idol worshiper, from a non-Jewish mother, that one korei bincha, that one is not called your son. Ela b'na, rather it's called her son. And so we understand from that pasuk again that if the mother is not Jewish, then it's her son. Then it's considered her child. The child is not Jewish. But if the mother is Jewish, so then the child is considered to be Jewish. And Rashi explains, Lo tischaten bam, lo teheloch bam, Torah schison. Again, there's no chasnos when it comes to the non-Jewish woman. And Rashi continues, again, the pasuk said, Ki Yasser es bincha, he's going to remove your son from after me. Le'el minei ksiv, earlier in the pasuk it says, Bitcha lo siten livno, it says you shouldn't give your daughter over to his son, meaning to the non-Jew son. Uvito lo sikach livnecha, and then his daughter you shouldn't take for your son. There shouldn't be intermarriage. V'samech le, and near that pasuk it says, Ki Yasser es bincha, he's going to remove your son. Midelo ksiv, Ki Yasser es bitcha. Now it doesn't say he's going to remove your daughter. Mashma de ben hanolad la'ovet kochavim. What it seems to be saying is as follows. Let's say you have a child that's born to a non-Jewish father, mi bitcha, from your daughter, meaning from a Jewish mother. Ka'amar sheyisirenu ha'ovet kochavim me'achrav. So there the pasuk is saying that the non-Jew is going to remove your child from following HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'shaminon de ben bitcha afilu min ha'ovet kochavim korei bincha. You see from the pasuk that even though the father is an ovet kochavim, it's still called your son. He's going to remove your son from following HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's still your son because the mother is Jewish. V'ein bincha haba min ha'ovedes kochavim korei bincha. But on the other hand, the pasuk does not refer to your son that comes from the non-Jewish mother in the same way. That's not called your son. Midloksiv nami, from the fact that it doesn't say in the pasuk in that case, it doesn't say ki sasir es bincha, that she's going to remove your son. It doesn't call her son your son. The nishma minei de kapid nami kra bebito de lo sikach livnecha, because then it would have sounded like even in a situation where it's his daughter, you shouldn't take for your son, mishum ki saser es haben, hanolad lo mi bincha, then it would have had the same kind of language. She's going to remove the child that is born from that, she's going to remove it. He's no longer going to be your son. Alma ben hovedes kochavim eino kari bincha. You see from the fact the pasuk doesn't phrase it in that way, we see that the son of a non-Jewish mother is not called your son, ela b'na, rather it's called her son, and so then that's how we see again that this follows the mother. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravina says, Shmami, no, we see from this, Ben Bitcha, the son of your daughter, Habamin ha'ovet kochavim, where the father is an ovet kochavim, the father is not Jewish, Korei bincha, that's still called your son. And the Gemara continues, Nema Kasava Ravina, should we say that Ravina holds Ovid Kochavim v'Eved Habal Bas Yisrael, if you have an Ovid Kochavim or an Eved that has relations with a Bas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer, that the child is then considered a Mamzer? And the Gemara says to that, it doesn't go that far. Nihi de kosher lohava, granted that that child is not considered kosher, but Mamzer lohava, it's not a Mamzer either, Pasul Mikri, that child is just called disqualified. And Rashi explains, Leima Kasava Ravina Ovid Kochavim v'Eved Habal Bas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer Garsin, and maybe we should say Ravina even goes so far as to say that the child is a Mamzer, to Asal Ashmin and Delo Shadinan Le Basar Ovid Kochavim, because he's coming to teach us that the child doesn't follow the non-Jewish father. The name of Ovid Kochavim, who we don't say that he's a non-Jew, Vim Nisgayer, and in that case, if he was not Jewish and he would be Megayer, he would convert, Yehi Mutter Lava Bakal, then of course he'd be Mutter, it'd be permitted for him to enter the congregation. Ella Basar Yisrael is Shadinan Le. Rather, Ravina is saying again that it follows his mother, the Jewish mother. The Kevan Sheba Avera Nolad. Now, since there was an Avera over here through which this child was born, Havale Yisrael Pasal Kashar Noladim Mimisha Ein Olav Kiddushim. That should be the same as any Yisrael Pasal, any disqualified Yisrael that's born from a relationship where there is no Kiddushin. The Tanan B'Masnisin Shein Mamzerim. We say in general in the Mishnah that in those cases they're Mamzerim. And the Gemara says, no, Mashani mehachalu sishma mamzeris. The Gemara says that's not true. In a situation where the mother is not Jewish, it's not going to be a mamzer. Nehi d'shaminan mina de kosher lo havin. Now, granted that the child is not considered a kosher, midashadi le basar yisrael lios nolad ba'avera. In other words, we're saying he's a yisrael that's nolad ba'avera, so it's not a kosher. But mamzer mia lo sishma mina. It's not going to be a mamzer either. Kedamrinan b'yavamas, like we say in Yavamas, the mamzer me eshes aviv. When you have a mamzer's learned out from eshes aviv, the wife of his father, a person takes the wife of his father. Yolif, that's where it's learned from. Ma eshes av de ein lo ala kiddushin, by an eshes av, so there's no kiddushin between the individual and a person's father's wife. Aval yesh lo kiddushin al acheres. However, there is kiddushin to somebody else, meaning it's a situation where there's no kiddushin over here because of their particular relationship. The aloksiv shavlad mamzer. It's only in those kind of situations where the child is a mamzer. If it's a prohibited relationship, let's say in the standard situation, a prohibited relationship that's kares or chayiv misa, according to Rabbi Akiva, even if it's a situation of a lav. But if the prohibition stems from the fact of this particular relationship, so then we say the child is a mamzer. The samech lo yava mamzer, because near that pasuk it says lo yava mamzer. Afkol she'ein lo ala kiddushin. So too in any case where there's no kiddushin, aval yesh lo kiddushin al acheres. In a situation where there's no kiddushin here, but there's kiddushin in other circumstances, lafuke ovid kochavim. Now that comes to exclude, let's say, a non-Jewish mother, the less like kiddushin klal. By an Ovid Kochavim, by a non-Jew, so there's no Kiddushin at all in such a situation, so there the child is not going to be a Mamzer. However, Pasul Mikri, the child is just called Pasul, just called disqualified. Kishar no Lodim Be'avera, that would be like other no Lodim Be'avera, Mechai Ve'lav no Aseh She'ein Mamzerim. Let's say there's a violation of a lav, again not according to Rabbi Akiva, or let's say there's a violation of Aseh, so in those situations, generally speaking, most Shitas hold they are not Mamzerim, and that's the same thing over here as well. It's considered to be a Pasul, a disqualified child, so to speak, but not a mamzer. But the Gemara continues, Ahu b'shiva goyim ksiv, but these psukim that we quoted above, meaning the pasuk of lo tischatin bam by a non-Jew and the pasuk of ki yaser is bincha by a non-Jew, that's not by all non-Jews, it's only written by the 7 nations of Canaan. Sha'aru mos minolan, how do we know that this applies to all other nations? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says ki yaser is bincha, because he's going to remove your son. The pasuk is giving a reason. Now the rabbos kol ha'mesirim, that's actually an extra pasuk, because you don't need to give the reason. It's obvious that that is the reason. And that extra phrase in the pasuk comes to say that anybody who removes your son from after HaKadosh Baruch Hu is treated the same way as the Shiva Goyim, meaning to say all non-Jews, the halacha will be the same. But the Gemara says, Hanichol Rabbi Shimon, the Darish time of the Kra. Now that works according to Rabbi Shimon, because in general Rabbi Shimon darshans the reasons behind the pasuk. You don't need to say the reason, because we automatically darshan the reason of the pasuk, so it's an extra phrase. El Rabbanan, but according to the Rabbanan, my time, and what's the reason? This is not an extra phrase. The pasuk does need to say the reason. And the Gemara answers Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, this pasuk is talking about Yefas Toar. Let's say in the middle of a war, there's a beautiful woman that's taken captive, so the pasuk has certain heterim that the soldier is allowed to take this woman as a wife. But the pasuk says, V'achar kein, after you go through this whole process, Tavu eleu v'alta, so then you'll be able to come upon her and have relations with her. But what does that pasuk imply? Mechlau, that pasuk implies that when it comes to this non-Jewish woman, Demei kara lo tafsi ba kiddushin, that from the outset, if you don't go through the proper process, so then the kiddushin will not take effect. And the Gemara continues, Eshkechon de lo tafsi ba Kiddushin, so we find that there's no Kiddushin again by these non-Jewish women who are not from the 7 nations of Canaan. Valda kemosa menolan, from where do we know that the child follows the mother? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, Kisiyena leish v'yoldu lo. It says that Kisiyena leish, this is the same pasuk we quoted on the previous Amud. If a man has 2 wives, that one is loved and one is hated, and they have children, the one who's loved has a child, the one who's hated has a child, and then the one who's the Bechor happens to be the child of the one who is hated. But in any case, we learn from that pasuk, since it says in the pasuk Kisiyena leish, and then it says v'yoldu lo, kol heichad de karinan be Kisiyena, anytime you can say Kisiyena, anytime there is Kiddushin, Karinan be v'yoldu lo. So then we say v'yoldu lo, the children follow the father. V'chol lo Karinan be Kisiyena. But if you can't say that it's Kisiyena, meaning it's a situation, non-Jewish woman where there's no Kiddushin, so lo Karinan be v'yoldu lo, then we don't call it v'yoldu lo. It's not going to follow the father, rather it's going to follow the mother. And the Gemara says, Yachi, if so, Shifcha Nami. If that's the case, we can learn from this pasuk the same thing by a Shifcha. We asked earlier, what's the source by a Shifcha that the child follows the mother? This could be the source. And the Gemara says, Enochi Nami, indeed that is correct. This is the source by Shifcha as well. So, Elo ha'isha v'ilodeh tia ladoneh lamali. So that pasuk we used earlier by Shifcha, ha'isha v'ilodeh tia ladoneh, that the woman and her children follow, they become slaves to the master, and that we understood means that children follow the mother. That's used. What is that used for? And the Gemara answers to that, L'chidatanya, it's used for the following brisa. And Rashi explains, Hai b'shiva umos ksiv, those psukim are written by the 7 nations, meaning lo teschatin bam v'chiyosir, meaning the psukim of lo teschatin bam and kiyosir, b'shiva goyim sheb Eretz Yisrael u'dichsiv, that's written by the 7 nations of Eretz Yisrael. Sha'ar umos menolan, so from where do we know by other nations that the Kiddushin will not take effect and that the child follows the mother? And the Gemara then answered, it's the pasuk of kiyosir, the pasuk gives the reason, because he's going to turn your child away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but according to Rabbi Shimon, that reason is extra, because Rabbi Shimon darshans the reasons of the psukim anyhow. The Dorish time and Dekra, Rabbi Shimon darshans the reason of the pasuk. This is Baba Metzia, says Rashi, this is a case in Baba Metzia, Gabe Almona, by a widow, Deka Amar, because Rabbi Shimon says, Ashira memashkin and osa, Aniya lo memashkin and osa, that a wealthy Almona, you're actually allowed to take collateral. And when the pasuk says you can't take a collateral from an Almona, it's talking about a poor Almona, that you can't take the collateral, because he darshans, he understands the reason behind the pasuk. The time of my Amar Achmona lo sachbol beged Almona, because what's the reason why the pasuk says you can't take the garment of the Almona as a collateral? Because every evening she's poor, you're going to need to return it to her in the evening. Let's say it's an evening garment. And because of that, since every morning you're going there to take the mashkon, to take the collateral, and every evening you're going to return the collateral, so you're giving her a bad name among her neighbors, and that's the reason of the pasuk. Now he's going to say the same thing when it comes to the intermarriage. Mishum kiyasir, he understands the reason of kiyasir. The pasuk doesn't need to explain what the reason is that he's going to turn away your children from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By yasir le kiyasir l'rabo sharuma, so it's an extra phrase, and it includes other nations, even other nations besides the 7 nations of Eretz Yisrael. However, according to the Rabbanan, the pasuk does need to give the reason. On the contrary, it's coming to exclude the other nations, because the other nations were not such idol worshippers like the 7 nations of Canaan. As we've established, that the nations outside of Eretz Yisrael, they didn't really serve idols. It was just a custom. They just kept up the customs of their fathers as a routine, but it wasn't really the worship. It wasn't true worship of idols. So you don't have this extra phrase in the pasuk. So from where do we know the other nations? We have a similar sugya in Sanhedrin, says Rashi. Talks about the fact that a king shouldn't take too many wives. They shouldn't turn away his heart. Till Rabbi Shimon have a high lo yasra yisura. According to Rabbi Shimon, that lo yasr levava, they shouldn't turn away his heart, is an extra phrase in the pasuk. We would have known the reason without the Torah telling us. And according to the Rabbanan, where in general the Torah does not give the reason, so here the Torah has to explain the reason. That's according to the Rabbanan. And Rashi continues, and again this is the pasuk of the Yafas Tohar. After you go through the whole process, then he can take her as a wife. Kosav, after you delay and follow the rules of the pasuk, Shehitar Lach Yafas Toar, the way in which the Torah allows a Yafas Toar, V'Aisa Lach Ksiv, then there's going to be a Havaya, then there's a Kiddushin. Dorish B'Havaya, Aval Meikara Kodem Heter, Lo Karenim Beva Haisa. But before you go through that process by a non-Jewish woman, there is no Kiddushin. And Rashi continues, V'yoldu lo, so if there is Kiddushin, so then the children are to him. Shemes yaches acharav, then the children follow the father. But lo karinam be v'yoldu lo, if there's no Kiddushin, the children do not follow the father. El acharehu mes yaches, rather it follows her, it follows the mother. And then the Gemara said, Ihachi shifchanami, if that's true, so then we have that source for shifcha. The val de kamoa, that can be the same source that by a shifcha the child follows her. Tepiklan me hai kra de halo karinan ba kisiyena. That pasuk, because since there's no kisiyena, there's no Kiddushin, k'dichsiv am im hachamor, am hadoma lechamor. Like it says in the pasuk, im hachamor, we said earlier, am hadoma lechamor. So since there's no Kiddushin, again, we should understand that the child follows the mother, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Tes Amud Aleph.